To give you a bit of perhaps framework of or idea of the kind of work that I've been doing in the last 10 years, I want to talk about art activism as a field and again a framework that I've been using in my work. Art activism as a way to go beyond the problems of the art world or aesthetic or decoration in the art world, and to connect this process of art making to political and social issues around us. This is one of my favorite quotes by Nina Simone from a documentary called What Happened, Miss Simone. Has anyone watched that or heard of it? Yeah, so if you haven't, you should. It's on Netflix, I think, still. And it's very beautiful and poetic. And somewhere in there, she talks about this thing that she calls an artist's duty. So how, as a musician and activist, for her, having access to a platform like her music making goes beyond just, again, this idea of making the music, but rather how to respond and participate and influence different political situations. In her case, of course, the Black struggles and also topics that she was interested in. And to me, that's something that I connect with in so many levels. Perhaps one of the things is growing up in Iran and realizing that politics was always embedded very much in the life that I live, in the lives of everyone around me, in a way that I think a lot of people who are artists, a lot of colleagues that I have, sort of feel that, again, that's part of their art making in a very natural and an organic way. And so for me, this has been a way to think through technology, think through ways that I make work. I want to start with this project, which is a project called Additivism, and sort of my fascination with digital fabrication, with 3D printing, 3D scanning, which started around 6-7 years ago. But one of the first questions that I became really interested in was this question, that what does a radical use of digital fabrication look like? And what is radicality at this very time? At a time in 2014, 2015, when I was working on a series of projects on 3D printing, every time I would talk about 3D printing or like tell people about my projects, they would always come back to this project and ask me if I've heard about it, which is this project by Cody Wilson called The Liberator, where the idea is that if you have access to this 3D model and you print it, you can potentially have a gun that can work. And when this project came out, there was a lot of buzz around it, there was a lot of press about it, and also court sessions for him. And something that I started to think about was that how in so many ways like radicality is connected to violence, and that's something that I wasn't interested in the work that I was doing, but how you can actually be radical and can be provocative in the work that you do, but not necessarily connected to this notion of, again, like violence. And also, if you really understand the process of 3D printing, you know that it's really hard to actually make this gun to work than, in America, to walk to a Walmart and buy a gun or use other ways to buy a gun. So the fact that people were responding to it in this like very specific way of like freaking out about it also showed that, again, this technology and its possibilities was something that had a lot of blurred lines, which happens a lot of time with new technologies. I should also say that the technology of 3D printing has been around for 30 years. It has never been accessible in this way, inexpensive, and the way that we can use it is something that, again, very recent. So in 2014, I collaborated with artist, writer Daniel Rourke, and we started a project, as I mentioned, called Additivism, which is a combination of two words, additive and activism. So additive processes like 3D printing or weaving or knitting can be an additive process versus, let's say, a subtractive process, which is laser cutting or like carving. We were really interested in this, again, process of additive processes, and then bringing that together with this idea of activism, and then reimagining again the possibilities of this machine, which was the 3D printer, not just as a machine, not just as a technology, but a machine that has potential for fictional thinking, for science fictional thinking, a machine that can be a metaphor, and also it can be practical. So it can also be used as a tool for actual activism work in relationship to the time that we're living. But for us, Additivism also became a collective, it became a community, ways that we built, ways of also like, I guess, like thinking around us. And that was also really important. And as part of Additivism, we had a manifesto called the 3D Additivist Manifesto, which we released in a form of a video. I'm not gonna have time to show this video, but if you're interested, you can check it out on my website. But the manifesto not only suggested, again, all these ways that we can push the possibilities and limitation of this technology, but also called different designers, writers, artists, activists to respond to us, to submit a series of work from recipes to blueprints to essays to OBJ STL files, which are 3D printable files. And then we made selection from submissions we received and also commissioned some people as part of the residency I did at Transmediale, and then put together this book, which is available online. And it contains the work of over 100 contemporary artists, and it's weird and poetic and also, again, both practical and impractical. So check it out, download it. If you open it in Adobe Reader, it's a 3D PDF, which is very nerdy, I know, but it's like 3D models can rotate in it, and you can like change colors. So sort of like, again, like bringing together this like text-based format with something that is 3D or three-dimensional. And so after this project, or like around the time that actually I was working on this project, I was also working on a series of work that was thinking about 3D printing as documenting, as archiving, and also as archiving as an art practice. And I started to work on this body of work called Material Speculation ISIS, where I reconstructed 12 artifacts that were destroyed by ISIS. If you remember, or might remember, in 2015, this video of ISIS members destroying the artifacts at Mosul Museum came out in Iraq, and it sort of went viral. Does anyone remember or have seen the video? Okay, I see some heads. I used to play this video, but then for reasons that maybe through my talk will become more visible, I stopped showing it, so yeah. When the video came out, it was a big shock for a lot of people, for historians and scholars, especially also for people who were living in the Middle East or like doing research around these kind of like artifacts. And also the way that the video was documented. I mean, if you've seen it again, it was really the first time that this kind of like destruction was documented so well and explained so well. So the format of the video itself, and then like at the beginning, it was like it was uploaded on YouTube. I mean, YouTube brought it down immediately, but the fact that they actually use these very platforms that we use on our daily basis as a way to promote, you know, their message, that's all of those. There's like so many layers of sad and dark fascination into this. But there was a lot of talk around that video, and again, as a continuation of the research that I was doing, I wanted to do a work that responded to that act of destruction. So I started to do a lot of research. I was like emailing, you know, historians, scholars, different people to gather information about the artifacts that were destroyed. And now talking about it, I always like think about it as thinking that, you know, I'm gonna swim in a pool and it turns into an ocean. That's really how it felt, because I really didn't know how much research this work required. And one of the reasons, for example, was that a lot of these artifacts that were destroyed were not documented well. And Mosul Museum, where the artifacts were destroyed at, has been under, in Iraq. Iraq has been under war, and the museum is understaffed. So there were not that much documentation available about the artifacts, about their histories. Even the names wouldn't match up. My research was in Arabic and Farsi and English, and a lot of material wouldn't match up. So it really became a work of finding the right information and then knowing which artifacts to work on. And the same issue also continued with the visual component of this project, which is that if you might know about software like 1to3D Catch or Memento, you might know that if you have let's say 30, 35 images from different directions of an object, still images, you can upload those if they're good quality or whatever, it can create a 3D model. And with this project, again, none of these processes was possible because of the lack of the images. The average amount of images I could find was between probably 10 to 12 from these artifacts that were destroyed. So we really had to rely on whatever images we had and the video that we had to do this kind of reconstruction work, which took a long time. So this is the first one, King Uthal, and then 3D printed King Uthal and Unknown King of Hatra, which is in resin material. But because the research component of this project was really important for me, I embedded these memory cards and drives inside the body of these artifacts that contains all the research that I had done in that 1 year. So this is PDF files, images, the process of even talking, those emails that I showed the screenshot of, all the documentation of sort of my correspondence with different scholars and historians, as well as OBJ-STL files, meaning that if you have access to this drive and this folder, you can 3D print these artifacts again. But I also was really mostly thinking about these sculptures at this point as time capsules. So how to keep this information, this memory that was lost or forgotten inside the body of these artifacts for future generations. I'm just gonna go through it real fast. And one question I usually get is that if you have to destroy these artifacts to have access to the memory cards or the flash drive, and the way I've worked on it is that they're sealed. I mean, it's hard to take out the sealed material to have access to the memory cards, but you don't have to destroy the objects. And that was actually a decision that was, I really was thinking about it. What does it mean if you had to destroy it again to get it out, and then why I didn't want that actually to happen. This is from a recent show at New Museum. But in 2016, I also wanted to find a way to give access to this material and information that I had gathered to the present time. So I worked with New Museum and Rhizome on a commission, and then we created this folder, the zipped folder that includes all this material, except for all the STL OBJ files, which I haven't released yet, except for one of them, which is King Uthal. But all the research material, information, images, etc., are in this folder, and it's free to download and to have access to. In 2017, I also sort of did this 3 heads which were outside of the Mosul Museum. I reconstructed them. They were destroyed, and I sort of wanted to work with them a little bit in a different way that I had worked with the other 12 pieces from Material Speculation. So these are basically connected to a USB, and then anyone who has their laptop or a hard drive, they can connect it to the USB and get all this information. So they can be installed, from a gallery wall or a more underground DIY spaces. Okay, so sort of like aftermath of material speculation is what I'm going to talk about. So with this kind of like work that was being done around a lot of these reconstruction projects, again, this is when ISIS was really at their peak. So they were doing a lot of deconstruction in Syria, in Iraq, and a lot of projects from tech companies, many of them based in Silicon Valley, etc., started to come out. Where they were doing this kind of like reconstruction work. And you know, my friends or people, etc., would like send me links to these things, and they're like, have you seen this? Do you know about this project? It kind of reminds me of your project. And after a while, I was like, I'm really curious, like what's happening with these reconstruction works that these tech companies are doing. And so I started to do research, like you know, sending emails, asking questions. But one thing that I started to notice is that actually the process of working, the way that these companies were doing this reconstruction work in many ways was problematic. And this is a time that I also coined the term digital colonialism, which a simple, I guess, definition of it is a framework for critically examining the tendency for information technologies to be deployed in ways that reproduce colonial power relationships. Obviously, my focus here was on the application of 3D scanners and 3D printers as tools in the hands of these like Western tech companies or archaeologists and institutions. But it's a term that can be applied to many other ways of this kind of like a kind of digital colonialism work being done. And there are a couple of issues. This can be a completely separate talk on its own, this whole thing around digital colonialism. So I'm like really giving you like a brief sort of bullet points of some of the issues that I start to think about. One is the issue of copyright ownership, monopoly of information, and monetary benefits. So I was looking at places like SciArc, which is in Oakland, California, and Google Arts and Culture Institute, and like looking at the way that they're practicing this kind of like 3D scanning or like saving this data and reconstruction projects. And on a lot of these websites, when you go there, you see images of these places that they have worked on, but you can't have information to access to information of any of the places that they have, like, let's say, done a 3D scan of. And I've like, remember I was in a conference in Berlin in 2015, and it was kind of like a tech conference with like a lot of 3D scanners and sort of the newest technologies coming out. And I was talking to a person, and he was like, oh, we have a 3D scan of Persepolis, which is this, really important historical site in Iran. And I was like, can I have access to it? I would love to have access to it. And then he's like, no, this is for like private institutions. We don't give access to these things that we 3D scan. So not only it's this monopoly of information, is privatized in that sense, but they also have copyright ownership of these objects that they 3D scan. This is for me one, I guess, way to like be able to explain this digital colonialism in a way that maybe is like easier to make sense of. So if some of you might know the Nefertiti head, which is like one of the most important Egyptian historical artifacts, has been in Germany for like many, many years. And so there has been a lot of back and forth between the German government and the Egyptian government, where the Egyptian government is like, you guys never had permission to take this, we want it back, and they're like, we're not giving it back to you, it's ours. And so we understand that, right? Like if you want to critically think about colonialism, historical colonialism, you can walk to British Museum, you can walk to the Met, and you see objects and different things in that space, and you sort of understand that a lot of these things, or you can question it, like how did this thing end up here? Was it by permission? And in a lot of times, it wasn't with permission. So I feel like when it's about this kind of physical object, we understand colonialism in that sense a little bit easier. But when it comes to digital colonialism, it's still, again, a very blurry line, even for lawyers, even for people who are like trying to like really understand how to deal with laws that actually connects to these kind of issues. So this is now a replica of the Nefertiti. And this is on a new museum again, like based in Berlin on their websites. And this is like one of the best, like one of the most, I guess, like perfect replicas that they had, which they have created with actually like 3D scans. And there was a project where these like two artists wanted access, the Egyptian artists wanted access to the 3D model of the Nefertiti, and the museum is like, we can't give you the model. And now on their website, they sell it for 8,900 euro. You can choose up to 10 of them. And so again, like we understand like that relationship perhaps better when we look at examples like this. Another issue that I was like thinking a lot about, again, in connection to digital colonialism, was this idea of alignment. So on a lot of these websites, again, like going back to some examples like SciArc, or even in conferences that I've been to, or Google Arts and Culture Institute, they talk about this idea of shared heritage, this idea of us, this idea of universal heritage. And that's something that I think through many, many centuries has been used as a language, as a way of colonizing or justification of colonizing other cultures. So this idea of we have to go and save these sites or these artifacts that are ours, that are shared as like humans, and so we basically, you know, have that permission because it's shared. And then another point is this issue of white savior, which is again this idea of like, we're gonna come here and then we're gonna help you to save these things, but then we're gonna bring back this data, we won't give it to you, we have the ownership and the copyright of this data, digital data and scans. And also like to actually like even go further from just the problem of tech companies, you can see that these kind of projects has been also used as a political message by different like leaders, etc., around the world. A project that happened, for example, in 2016 was this project called Palmyra, which again was a site that was destroyed in Syria. And UK archaeology department, with collaboration with UN, etc., they did this work where they reconstructed this. They had a 3D scan of it. They reconstructed the site and then put it in London, and then brought it actually also to New York on a tour. And the language that they use, the language in the case of the video that I'm going to show you in a second, that, for example, Boris Johnson uses, is that we are here to save these from the barbarians who destroyed this, completely basically removing themselves from their involvement actually in the Middle East. Not only US military and the UK military, they've destroyed many sites in Iraq and Afghanistan in the last years, but also the formation of ISIS actually was only possible because of the invasion of these countries, right? ISIS members were trained by the US military and then turned against them. But again, removing themselves from the violence that they are part of. So the video I'm gonna show is a remake of what actually happened by artist Ryan Woodring, but I think it's a very simple, powerful way of sort of summarizing.
And it is with great, great pleasure, therefore, that I hereby unveil the oldest new structure in the history of this city. Ladies and gentlemen, the Triumphal Arch of Palmyra. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so, you know, again, it's a very like simple gesture, but through like removing this very object that was supposed to be there as a point, it's a like very powerful act. And now from there, after like doing all this like work and writing and research around again these like concepts, I started to work on a new project called She Who Sees the Unknown, which I've been working on for like almost 3 years, and I am finishing the last figure right now for a commission I have. And She Who Sees the Unknown is a project in which I recontextualize monsters, jinn, or dark goddess figures that are originally from from the Middle East or North Africa. I use these female queer figures as ways or means to explore the catastrophes of colonialism, patriarchism, and environmental degradation in relationship to the Middle East. In addition, and in relationship to these ideas, one thing that has been really important for me is to look for new ways to position the Middle East. I want to move beyond this like simple binary view of West versus Islam, tech future versus religious history, and to look to forgotten, misrepresented, and suppressed histories and narrative. When we think about superheroes, I think this also makes sense in the context of a lot of like Western literature and movies, etc. A lot of the superhero figures are male, right? And that was also my experience of like growing up in Iran, where there are a lot of mythical stories, but they're always about these like male superheroes who can like win all the battles and they will never die, and you know, and they're like empowering. So I wanted to go back, and again in this relationship between history and technology, which is something that I've been fascinated by. Look at again examples or stories that focus on female or queer figures. These are again stories that are not known that much. Mostly they are very hidden, but they exist there, and they're there. And through bringing them out and telling new stories about them, I think you can turn around a lot, many different power structures. And so one of the, as I said, one of the figures that I'm interested in is this figure of Jen, or perhaps in English you're more familiar with it as Genie, which I hate to say because it's like that, like Aladdin scene comes to my mind, and it's so different than that. So to give you a little bit of background, if you might not know about Jen are actually figures that are talked about in the Quran. So there are angels who obey, there are devils that disobey, and human obey, disobey, and then the same with the jinn. Jinn have the will to obey and disobey. And they're hybrid. In many ways, they're hybrid of human, animal, or like monstrous human. And growing up in Iran, but also like a lot of other Islamic cultures, some of you, if you might have grown up in like any of these cultures, we also have a lot of stories about jinn on our like daily life. Like I remember my grandmother talking about how the bathhouse that she would go to in Kurdistan, in west of Iran, the people said they always saw jinn in that bathhouse. And they say actually jinn like bathhouses because they're dark and humid. So they're very present. These stories are very present in our like daily life experiences. And for me, this hybrid aspect of jinn as a figure is something that I think there's like a lot of potential to work with and work around. A concept that I started to develop and think about in relationship to She Who Sees the Unknown was this concept of refiguring or refiguration. So not only refiguring in terms of like going back and finding these stories and like finding illustrations of them and then making new models of them, etc., and reappropriating those like visual elements, but refiguring as this ficto-feminist and activist practice that can be used again as a way to reimagine the past so that we can reimagine different kind of futures, alternative kind of futures. That's one of my favorite quotes by Donna Haraway, which she says, "Figures collect our hopes and fears and show possibilities and dangers, both imaginary and material. Figures root peoples in stories and link them to histories." And for me, that's one of the reasons that I think this is a very, very powerful project. So also, why monstrosity? And I think embracing monstrosity is something that, again, has a long history with a lot of like feminist theories, from Donna Haraway to Rosie Braidotti, to even the image of witches, right? Like in the Western stories, etc. Witches had always been known as these like negative, ugly, old figures. But then through many different kind of like performances, writing, and practices, artists, activists, etc., have moved around this image of the witch as, again, an image that can be empowering. And so that's what I'm trying to do with these monsters. So I am just now going to go through and talk about the figures that I worked on, which are four of them, and show you also like little video excerpts of them. This is the first one. Her name is Huma. And you can see this is from an illustration, one of the illustrations that I found, which is from Kitab al-Bulhan, which is an old ancient Arabic manuscript. And I reappropriated a little bit and then 3D modeled it and created this like sculpture from it. So all of these projects have basically two main components. One is this component of sculptural part, which is that I build these shrine-like spaces, where as an audience you enter this place, and for each of these figures it's like very specific to that figure. And then you can sort of like experience an environment and an atmosphere with this like very specific figure. So for Huma, I had created these like talismans from different material that sort of like sit around her. And her story connects to, in some ways, to global warming, but this idea of her bringing heat to human body and then extending that to Earth. But what I wanted to do with her story was to perhaps question the way that we talk about or we even suggest solutions toward global warming, right? Because I think it's still very Western-centric. Not only in ways that it's talked about in media, in press, etc., but also in ways that solutions are suggested, right? Like Elon Musk leaving and going to Mars, like who's going to be left behind, right? Who's going to go with him? And whenever there is catastrophe, one thing we know is that the people who will be left behind are, usually people of color, or there's class separation. Or again, depending on the countries that these things are happening, it's about access, right? It's about ways that we can get through a catastrophe. And so Huma, in a poetic way, in a combination of utopian, dystopian way, comes to create some kind of justice where, if we're all gonna die from global warming, we all die from it, or if we're all gonna survive, we have to find a solution that works for everyone, right? We have to imagine possibilities and building worlds with S and not just a word, and futures with an S and not just one future. So I'm just gonna play an excerpt of this.
In the whole universe, there was none better, none whom she, Huma, could not best. She leads all the burnings, looking up from the sun. She is a demon with 3 heads, 2 identical, vaguely equine, one looking right and the other left, leveled within an infinite horizon to see the disaster above her. The 3rd head faces forward, above the other 2, looking into the future. Her open legs with bent knees and open arms, suppressing all creatures. Great in respect, a monster in her form, she's the sight of the warm globe and the slowly burning human. Her 3 talismans are encountered frequently. One to simply summon and invoke her, to call and conjure her, chanting her name 7 times in a row. She enters from the most unforeseen openings. She bubbles up and out of the deep, dark bowels of the earth, forcing the heat of the desert to all she will possess, in favor of the rotting and heated bodies, airs, rocks, and oceans.
Okay, and if you would like to see these videos in full, any of them, please let me know, email me, and I will send you the password. The next figure is Aisha Qandisha, and she is a Jinn, originally from Morocco, who is a Jen of Rivers. She's known as the opener. So when she possesses human, mostly men, she literally creates a crack on their body. So she opens them to a space outside. She opens them to an incoming data of other demons and Jinn. And the only way to not go insane when you're possessed by her is to participate with her, is to listen to her. And so I use her story and as a way, as a perhaps like very like personal, also like empowering way to talk about a love story, heartbreak, revenge, and then healing. In addition to that, I create these like very specific installations for each of these figures. This is Aisha in a blood pool with her reflection, with the video, and sort of all these layers of, I guess, media also kind of like embedded into each other as you enter the room to listen to the video and her story. Well, shout out to Prince Harvey, who's here, who did the audio for that, and to Sally Glass for constantly editing all my texts, and for Emily for long, phone calls. Like, I have a whole crew sitting right here, and thank you. Okay, the third figure is the story of Ya'juj Ma'juj, which again is a story that is talked about in the Quran. Ya'juj Ma'juj are known as a community of people or a group of individuals who represent chaos. And the story in the Quran is that a person named Zulqarnain is chosen because the people of this city is asking him to build an iron wall to keep them out of their city, to keep them safe. And these are some illustrations about Ya'juj Ma'juj. There are so many different illustrations from them. But this is the one that I have reappropriated from, again, some material called Kitab al-Bulhan. And so I came across this story a little bit after the travel ban. When the travel ban happened, I had an Iranian passport and a green card, and I had left to go to Berlin for a conference. And then the ban happened, and I was stuck in Germany for a little while, because if you remember at the beginning, green card holders were also included. And I lived in the US at a time for 10 years. I can't go back to Iran. So it was sort of this moment in my life where like it felt as if like everything that I had built in the last like 10 years or whatever, I could just go back to zero, just like that. And I had to like figure out a whole new thing for my life. So it was very intense. But I was privileged enough to have that green card and be able to, come back, while there are a lot of people who are still like dealing with serious life-related, issues because of the ban, including my relatives and family members. So, and when I came across this story, reading about the Iron Wall and them being banned, I was fascinated by it. And one thing that, they say in a lot of interpretations of this like Islamic text is that when Ya'juj Ma'juj come and break through this wall is when we're going to experience some kind of ending. So I use their story to talk about, again, issues in relationship to ban rejected bodies, immigration, and through this storytelling, again, since the video I'm showing you is only an excerpt, through this storytelling, the role of people who ask Ya'juj Ma'juj to be, put behind these walls change, sort of like questioning who is chaos for who. But also through history, like if you think about it, we've always found this other or this like monstrous group of people to ban. And even the interpretation of Ya'juj Ma'juj is very interesting because there are people who say, oh, Ya'juj Ma'juj is, they mean Turkish people who were trying to attack Iran, or some people say, no, they were Mongolians. So, always looking for this, again, notion of the other. And when I talk about this embracing of monstrosity, this is what I talk about, like through embracing of this otherness, this monstrosity, being able to really question these ways that through history we have othered certain group of people. And there's a VR version of this, which I created in collaboration with Demoda. And I'm just going to show you a quick excerpt of it. So I 3D printed these and then I 3D scanned them. That's what you're seeing is a screenshot of the 3D scanned sculptures. All right, I'm going to pass through it. Again, happy to share the password. And then the last figure I want to talk about is the laughing snake, which I came across this illustration first, again, from Kitab al-Bulhan originally. This specific illustration is from a book called The Book of Felicity. And in it, up there, it says, the image of the laughing snake and the mirror. And her story is that she's this snake going through all these like towns and cities and killing all these animals and humans, and no one can stop her until someone comes and says that the only way to kill her, to destroy her, is to hold a mirror in front of her. And you can see like up there, there's those men holding a mirror in front of her. And when they hold a mirror in front of her and she sees her own reflection, she starts laughing from that reflection. And she laughs for days and nights until she basically dies from laughter. And for me, like I sort of, again, wanted to take this laughter and the death as a position that was like powerful. So for this destruction means the destruction of the reflection that was sort of created for her by these men. And I connect this story to a story of sexual harassment, sexual desire, etc., street harassment, specifically growing up in Iran. I think when the Me Too campaign stuff was happening, it was a very, mostly like actually like focus on white women experiences about these issues. So I wanted to kind of like work on a project that also like talked about different ways that these experiences can be experienced in different cultures or parts of the world and how that can be different. And her sculpture is installed in a mirrored room where, as an audience, you enter, you can see her reflection and also your reflection. And then there's a net art piece that I won't be able to show, but kind of like tells this story. It's a hypertext that tells the story of my personal story of like sort of like harassment, etc. That is also a collective story for like many women who have grown up in Iran or like different parts of the same region. But again, please feel free to go and spend time with this work. And I wanted to kind of close with and go back to what I started with this idea of art activism. So with this body of work, as you can see, it's very research-based. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to sort of unfold. And the way I think about this work is that how I can push this research and these ways of thinking outside of the walls of the gallery. So one way is that I create these reading rooms. So every exhibition that I show this work in usually have a reading room where I share all my material, research material that are in progress, from books, articles, images that I have gathered. This is a huge archive that I'm gathering. So the ones that I just talked about are just the chosen figures that I worked with. But there's so many more of these stories and material and illustrations. So I want this space to be a space that can be activated, a space that the audience can come and sit and read about these things. For somebody growing up in different parts of Global South or North Africa, etc., perhaps a lot of things I said, I saw people like nodding and kind of like knowing the knowledge that I'm sharing, but like from people coming from different cultures, perhaps a lot of these things are not something that immediately perceivable. So this is a space to do that, to spend time with this material. In addition, I do these sessions and events called Refiguring, where I invite different women from, again, different parts of the Middle East with different background. They're scientists, activists, etc., to come and talk about different topics in relationship to again, something that I propose or they can propose that we focus on. And they're done in this very like casual setting, which the audience sits around us and we talk, and it's not what I'm doing right now, which is like giving a lecture and you guys are watching me quietly. So we all talk to each other and interact that way. And also these performance lectures where I combine different, again, stories of these like figures in relationship to other topics that I don't get to talk about in my videos, or topics that are like more collective topics. And I invite other artists to join me in this kind of work, in this kind of collaboration. And these are ways for me to, again, sort of break through the walls of the gallery, to break through thinking about my art making only as a practice that can be kind of clinical and sit in this like one space. And that's a question I get a lot of times, especially from like students, like how can you like practice this and still like be an artist? And I'm just giving you some examples, but I'm sure there are so many other ways you can explore this. So with that, just thank you. I think we have some time for Q&A, right? Do we have time for Q&A?
Yeah, just go and see.
Yeah.
We're going to do like a Q&A next, so just raise your hand and then I'll hand you the mic.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Morehshin. Thank you for your wonderful talk.
Thank you.
I have a few questions. To start with the first one, I feel like your work strongly engages with the history of the monument, but in a very novel way. And I wanted to ask you, what sort of monuments do we need? Does the 21st century need?
That's one of the best questions I've ever received. Thank you for that.
Flew all the way here to see that talk.
And it's a difficult question. I mean, I don't think I can speak for us as, you know, everyone, what we need. But what I know is that, and what I've like realized is that whenever it comes to basically representation of like whether it's monuments or like these histories or stories, it's always been for many, many years in this like very specific one-sided way, right? So what I said at some point in my talk, I said I think we need futures and worlds, and I think that also connects to this idea of monuments, perhaps as a more like visual representation of that. So, and also different ways of like reading the past, and that's what I'm doing as like one person. But there's so many other people are doing this kind of work, where we're realizing that our stories are misrepresented and hidden, and you know, the future is imagined in this like very one specific way, and the only way to break through that is to amplify these stories and spaces. So I think the only way we can also do that is through a collective way of thinking about building that space. So yeah, I can't tell you exactly what kind of monuments we need. I just know we need the kinds that already don't exist, and the kinds that do something differently, perhaps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have one more question if no one is asking. I wondered about the role of music and sound in your work. I feel like it's really important to you, but I haven't really seen you talk about it much. So.
Yeah, because I'm so bad at music and sound. That's why I always have someone to collaborate with. I mean, I think I do know what I want, and that's why I always like direct people into like, okay, these are the examples. This is what I want, or here's a collection of like samples I've gathered, which can, you know, guide you through what I want. This is the feeling that I want. But I've always collaborated with people to make the sounds, because I know what I want. I just don't know how to make it. So I think I'm just like not musically trained in that sense, but I find it important and very like kind of like even especially like depending on your medium, like I think it like that importance can also like shift. Like right now I'm working on a VR piece that I'm making from scratch, and until like 2 weeks ago we didn't have any audio and sound, and like we finally like finished that, and then when I inserted it into the piece and like listened to it, it was completely different. It's so weird that like it's, you know, it just changed the environment in a way that I had never actually like experienced. Maybe it's also because it's like VR, so like you're embedded into this like space that is disconnected from the outside. So I like working with people and sort of telling them what I want. And yeah, it's been really great to have actually access to a lot of creative people around me to do this.
Thank you.
So just a question for you about this digital colonialism. So we've seen decades of post-colonial studies happening. So what would be digital post-colonialism? How would that work?
I don't know. Hopefully someone in the next generation can do that, because I don't know what would that be. But for me, the term digital colonialism was very specific about, again, like thinking, because post-colonialism is not necessarily just like in relationship to technology. So the word digital for me was something that important, because I think it can bring our focus into, again, like specific practices that are considered digital. There are terms even like electrocolonialism. Like I've seen so many like terms, but like they can be specific about something. So for me, again, that term was important because it brings focus into something that I wanted to categorize as, right? And I think that's why we create terms, because we're like, I don't feel these things actually really talked about in this way. And sometimes terms can, or like categories can like help us do that work.
Any other questions?
I wanted to ask a question about the materials and the materialization of your 3D prints. When you choose what type of material or like the look of the way your objects are printed, does it like what makes you get there? Like for like the resin one that was like the objects that were destroyed, I understand like the clearness to show like, you know, what was inside of it, but like in terms of like how like shiny or just like how like matte or like textured something is, what's your like thought process behind that?
Yeah, and this is a very new world to me also, this whole like sculptural world. So it's been a lot of like experimenting with material in that way. But the first series of work that I actually did with 3D printing, which I didn't talk about today, which was called Dark Matter, was in like PLA. It's like super raw looking. I wanted it to look that way because it kind of like, you can actually see the layers of something being 3D printed. So that was like a very different aesthetic choice compared to like material speculation, where I was like, I want it to be a clear resin because I want the memory card and the drives inside to be seen, because that has been important to me as part of like the process of the work. So again, like having that visibility of this like digital inside this like physical object was something that was important to me as an aesthetic choice. And then with She Who Sees the Unknown series, as you can see, it's like very, very different. I'm definitely, again, like learning and like making more like diverse choices, but also it's money, it's like funding, which is a real thing with like 3D printing. So there are times that I'm like, oh my God, this would be so amazing, like if I could like work on it like this way or that way, but then it will be way more expensive to do that. But I'm also not like really fascinated by like big objects in general. You know, people always are like, why don't you make this like really huge? I'm like, why? You know? So it has to be a reason. Like the laughing snake is actually the biggest object I've ever printed, which is like in 3 pieces and it's like 25 inch. I wanted that feeling of like going to the room and this like snake being kind of like hung from the ceiling and it's like in all the mirrors. So that's when I made like that choice. But yeah, again, I'm always like asking the question of like, why it's this size, why this like material? And as I said, still like learning a lot about it. But I find resin to be a material that I kind of like a lot with 3D printing, because it's very like sculptural and sort of weight-wise, it's kind of like heavy, and it's shiny, so, you know.
What do you feel are the responsibilities of artists to relinquish ownership of their work in order to avoid being colonialists?
There's one quote that I really like, again by Donna Haraway, but she says, it matters which stories tell stories, which systems systemize systems, and which figures figure figures. So it matters what kind of artist you're talking about. You know, if a white person is making work about Black people's struggle, we have a conversation, you know, we gotta talk about it. So it depends, I guess, the context. And that was like my whole point, where people were like, oh, look at this Palmyra project. I'm like, what the Boris Johnson's like talking about? This is like, I hate this project. And like, how can you like compare the two? So I think that's just, yeah, it's a relative question.
I think you're doing something very important in bringing the Middle Eastern world to the Western world. And I was wondering if you show your work in the Middle East and what the reaction, or because I think that's also very important, especially with the She Who Sees the Unknown.
Yeah. So I do not as much as obviously like I do it like here, because I haven't been back to like Iran, for example, for like 12 years. But I do show it. I actually showed it in Istanbul Contemporary like 1 year, like I think it was like 4 years ago maybe. And with She Who Sees the Unknown, it's very interesting. I was actually just giving a talk on Skype in Iran, and there was like so much less information I had to share, because I don't need to tell people what a djinn is, for example. They all know and they all understand the like cultural like relationship we have to it. So it's different. It's like such a different space. There are things that, again, like knowledge-wise, I don't have to kind of like share in that way. But at the same time, then there are things that I also probably have to like shift in terms of how I present things, you know. Well, with Shiusizianon, I think I've always felt also safe in terms of like talking about it, because I don't look at the Jinn figure or like any of these stories as like, oh, it's weird, or like, you know, I like really honor the work and like honor that like belief system. So that has like maybe like created a little of like a more of like a space that I feel less worried to like talk about it. But yeah, it can be challenging based on the situation. Like with Yajuj Majuj, I wanted to show it in this like one specific institution, and they were like, well, you're using a story from the Quran, you know, and you're talking about all these like feminist theories, and you're talking about, you know, so they're like, we don't know how our audience is going to respond, so maybe this is not a good fit, like let's look at material speculation. So there's that, you know, I'm talking about queer figures, I'm talking about jinn and empowering like these like monstrous figures, so that can sometimes create challenges.
I just wanted to say thank you one more time, Morehshin. That was great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone.